Staying hydrated out on the bike is vital, and I think everyone knows the end result of getting this part of our riding wrong.
I'm being a bit in a bad way, actually. I'm gonna have to call it in, unfortunately, guys.
And since I've had some pretty tough moments at the hands of poor hydration, I've been researching the topic more and more. And for this video, I've managed to rope in some expert help with all the latest info. Of course, to stay hydrated, first you need to be able to carry all those liquids. Now, we here at GCN are really lucky to be supported by Camelback for all our hydration needs, be it a shorter ride or a big multi-day epic adventure. We've got the options to stay covered. So this is our kind of hydration supply to pick from, depending on the mission, so to speak. Bottles and packs from Camelback. So these can either be worn or fitted to the frame. I'm going to start off talking a bit about the bottles we use though. Personally, I always like to opt for the biggest bottle possible. So these are 710 ml, 24 ounces. I do think it's an advantage to be able to take as much as possible, making sure you're keeping on top of your hydration needs and you're able to drink when you need to without stopping and refilling. But for shorter rides, a smaller bottle works perfectly too. I've often found that being able to keep my drink cold can really encourage me to drink as well, especially in hotter climes. So Camelback have an insulated version of their bottle. This is the chill version, which is double wall insulated to keep your drink cold as you're riding. But there's also a step up from that. So these are the podium bottles. They're available in steel and even titanium. So these are double wall vacuum insulated. Camelback say this will keep your drink cold for most of the day, which is quite a big win, especially if you're heading into hotter climes and you really want that nice ice cold drink to sip on. One thing I think that is really worth considering when you're thinking about a bottle is how able it is to keep out kind of dirt and grime from what's inside. So all these bottles have a two-way self-sealing valve, so it's quite hard for things to get in, and you can also get a cap which stops things. It's kind of an extra barrier. I found that really useful on kind of longer bike packing trips where you really don't want to be drinking what's on the road, because that inevitably does get on your bottle. So to help keep yourself healthy, stop yourself getting sick, that is a really good feature to think about. Away from bottles, you could also think about a rucksack or pack that you wear to increase your carry capacity. So this is Camelback's Chase Vest that has 1.5 litres of water, which will fit in here, and 2.5 litres of gear capacities too. So this is kind of really useful for like a longer gravel ride, or maybe kind of like a dawn to dusk epic on your road bike, especially where refill options aren't as frequent. I think the biggest advantage of a hydration pack is that they're really easy to drink from, as well as being able to carry quite a lot. So if you're someone that's nervous of taking hands off the bars, holding a bottle, maybe riding in areas that are quite technical and you're worried you're just not going to drink enough, having this kind of tube there, you can drink from it with both hands whilst they're on the bars. It's a big advantage. Plus you've got extra space for bits and bobs. You can carry snacks. I like to put a phone or a GoPro in here while I'm filming. And the way these are designed, they don't bounce around too much. You really don't notice it as much as you would with the kind of bog standard backpack. Plus you've got space to still access your pockets in your jersey from behind as you normally would. If you really want to up your carry capacity though, you could consider a pack like this, which fits to the frame of your bike. So this contains a reservoir which takes 2 litres of water. It's Camelback's mule frame pack, and it also has space for gear, kind of like mechanical spares or even items of food. Really easy to drink from too, so you can just drink from the tube here. And you can also actually take out the reservoir and use it as a normal bottle, which is something that's quite handy. This is super useful on kind of longer bike packing trips where resupply points are at a proper minimum. Really allows you to up the amount of water and liquids that you can take while still having the bottles in your bike if you have a larger frame like me. It's also quite useful because the bike takes the weight of the water, so if for whatever reason you don't like wearing a rucksack, you can still up your carry capacity, but the bike's doing all the work. Whatever your riding goals then, there are options out there to make sure that you can carry what you need for the ride ahead. But now let's delve into the science a bit more about what's actually best to put in all this. What should you be drinking? Recently, I caught up with founder of Precision Fuel and Hydration, Andy Blow, to get the lowdown. Andy, thanks for joining us. Let's start off with why is hydration so important and what's going on in our bodies as we begin to dehydrate?
Well, as an athlete, when you dehydrate, you are essentially losing blood volume because your sweat is where your hydration loss comes from. You sweat effectively blood plasma out onto the skin surface. It evaporates and it cools you down, which is great, but it means you've got less blood in your system overall. And you'll know as an athlete, one of the things your body's got to do to keep you going while you're riding a bike is pump blood all around the system. So if your blood volume's decreasing, then you're not going to be able to do that as effectively. You can't cool down as effectively, you can't get nutrients to your muscles, you can't take waste products away, so your cardiovascular system is under way more strain.
So let's go to kind of the beginning, pre-ride. What is the best way to start out and make sure you're setting off in the best way possible, perfectly hydrated?
Yeah. A lot of athletes, when research studies have been done, it's been shown that a lot of athletes routinely turn up to training sessions and maybe even races a little bit dehydrated. And I think that's sometimes got to do with just life. You rush into a training session in the evening, you haven't been drinking properly during the work day, then you're going to be a little bit on the back foot before you start. And that is always going to be detrimental to your performance. Most people think that the best way to pre-hydrate before an event is just to drink loads of water. And whilst you do probably want to increase your water consumption a little bit in the days leading up to an event, you can't store, you're not a camel, you can't store loads of that water. So you take a little bit more just to make sure there's no deficit. But if you take on too much, what happens is you end up just peeing it all out. And almost, counterintuitively, people have been taught that if your pee is clear, then you're well hydrated.
Yeah.
And athletes being athletes, thinking that more is better with most stuff, we tend to drink more and more and more, thinking we're peeing clear all the time, and this is a great sign that we're fully topped up. When in actual fact, if you do it too much, it becomes very detrimental. You start to wash out electrolytes and leave yourself in a depleted state.
Okay, so what should you do then? Because I've read a little bit about preloading your hydration. Can you kind of explain what that is?
Yeah, preloading is like, if you compare it with carb loading, which a lot of people do understand, is you eat more carbs in the last 2-3 days before an event and you store those carbs in your muscles as glycogen, and then that gives you more energy on the day. That starts 2 to 3 days before. With preloading for fluids, you can't start 2 or 3 days before because your kidneys are going to cause you to pee more and kick it out. So what you do is, really, it's on the day of the event, a few hours before, you can drink a drink which has a very strong electrolyte content, sodium in particular. So you need probably upwards of 1,500 milligrams of sodium per litre, which is about 3 times the strength of an average sports drink. But what that does, the sodium helps you to absorb that fluid and it helps you to retain it in the bloodstream. So what you actually start then with is expanded blood volume. So the typical recommendation is kind of one normal size water bottle, about 500 mils or so, of a very strong electrolyte drink 1 or 2 hours before you start, and that's going to expand your blood volume so that you actually do start with a little bit more hydration on board.
Okay, that's good to know. So much better than just going for pure water on its own.
Yeah.
Okay, Andy, when we're riding then, what actually should we be putting in our bottles? Because when I was racing, we always kind of had the choice between like hydration and like a carb mix. And to be honest, I kind of chose hydration when it was hot and I went for like carb mix, it was cooler. There was no real science involved in my decision. So what's your take on it?
It's entirely down to what you're trying to achieve, on that ride and how you want to fuel and hydrate, because you can use your bottles to carry pure water, just for hydration, and that's probably fine for a lot of people a lot of the time when you're doing shorter, easier rides, or if you're, especially if you're carrying multiple bottles. A lot of people do like to have one bottle of just plain fresh water, because not only is it useful if you just want to, if that's what you feel like you want to drink, but you can douse it over your head or whatever and, not become a sticky mess. You can use your bottles to get electrolytes as well, so you can use things like electrolyte tablets. Obviously, you use the ones that we make, the pH 1000 or pH 1500. The advantage of that is obviously you've got what you need for hydration just in one bottle, and then you're getting your fuel from whatever's in your pocket, so your gels, your bars, your bananas, your food, your Haribo, whatever you're eating. Or you can use your bottles to give you fuel and electrolytes. So a sports drink like a carbon electrolyte drink mix can give you quite a lot of your energy as well as your hydration.
Okay, and what is the like potential, let's say, danger or like misstep to going with just fuel in your bottles? Like, where can that kind of make you fall foul?
Yeah, if you put a lot of carbohydrate in your bottle, so you make quite a strong sports drink mix or carb drink mix, that can work really well if conditions are quite cool and you don't need loads of fluid, but you need a bit of energy and you're going to get it all from that place. It can also work really well if it's a shorter event when you're breathing quite hard and you just need a bit of energy and a bit of fluid, but the total amount is less important. The longer the events get and the hotter they get, the better it is to separate those things out to some degree, because the problem with having loads of carbs in your bottle is we've all probably had that experience where you get bloated and sick feeling from just drinking too much sugary liquid. And it's probably because there's a mismatch between your hydration needs and your fueling needs.
Yeah.
So if you're drinking 3 of those bottles an hour on a mega hot day in the summer and they've all got carbohydrate in, then you're almost likely going to feel sick because you're drinking for your hydration, but you're actually you're overdoing the fuel.
How do your hydration needs change as well as your ride progresses? So you're heading out for like 6 hours, 7 hours upwards, or even just 4 hours. Like how do you kind of manage that as the time goes on?
I think some of it will depend on how hard you're riding and what the weather's doing. Because as you know, if you start riding at 6 in the morning and it's somewhere that's it's a cold start to the day, you're not going to need as much in those first couple of hours as you might do as the sun comes up and you get warmer. So it's going to be quite situationally dependent. But what I would say is, even in that situation, you don't want to drink nothing for the first 2 hours and then suddenly wait till you're thirsty and start guzzling loads of bottles. I think it's good to, through your experience, to kind of gain an appreciation for how many bottles per hour you generally need, and then try to start drinking relatively early.
Andy, the last time you were here, you did a kind of a sweat test on me, and you found that I was quite a salty sweater. So I think it was around 1100 or 1150 milligrams of kind of sodium per hour that I was sweating out.
Per litre.
Per litre that I was sweating out. So I've always been using the 1,000 milligram tablets when I'm hydrating. It's worked quite well for me. If you do want to know more about that, do check out the video which we made on the topic in the link in the description below. But there's another metric which you can use to kind of work out what to drink in terms of your sweat rate. So can you explain a bit more about that?
Yeah, your sweat rate is obviously literally how much sweat you lose per hour. And it's relatively easy to work out. Anyone with a set of scales can do it, because you can weigh yourself before you go for a ride and you can weigh yourself afterwards. And if you account for whatever you've drunk in between, or ideally if you've gone out for say an hour or an hour and a half and not drunk anything, that difference in weight is your sweat rate. So if you lose 1 kilo, that's 1 litre of sweat. If you lose 1.5 kilos, that's 1.5 litres of sweat. So it gives you a good rule of thumb. And if you do that enough times in enough different conditions, you sort of build up a picture of what your individual sweat rate's like. And that can be a really useful metric, because if you are doing a 7-hour race, you can then sort of start to figure out what your likely fluid deficit is going to be and figure out how many bottles you're going to need to cover the majority of that.
And in terms of if we do kind of get dehydrated, what are the like telltale signs that we're going down the wrong path on a ride?
Yeah, the first one is probably really obvious to people, but you're going to feel thirsty, because your thirst instinct is hardwired into you to keep you alive. And dehydration, you can die pretty quickly from dehydration. We're talking about hours or days at best. So if you start to feel thirsty, there is a very good chance you are already starting to become significantly dehydrated. Obviously, if you are peeing, but you're not, or when you pee, it's very, very dark in colour. That's not always a sign that you're dehydrated, but say you've got thirst combined with like either not peeing for several hours or peeing and it's very, very dark, they're both kind of troubling signs that you might be becoming dehydrated. You might also get headaches. You're probably going to feel a bit lethargic, and all of the kind of, you're just going to feel like you're craving water. The other thing to look out for, if you do know your body weight, is to check where your body weight's at. So a lot of pro athletes that we work with weigh themselves on a fairly regular basis, because they know if they deviate from that number, if their body weight drops by a couple of percent, 3%, it means that they're probably behind on their hydration. So those 3 things really, thirst, urine colour and weight, if your weight's dropping, are concrete signs that you're probably becoming dehydrated.
Okay, and if you do notice those signs, what's like the best thing to do to get back on track?
If you have got to the end of a ride and you definitely know that you're thirsty and dehydrated, you haven't peed for ages, you've got a strong thirst on, there can be a temptation just to get back and smash loads of water to try and correct it. In actual fact, what the there's an abundance of science that shows that by using an electrolyte drinks with a lot of sodium in it, you'll rehydrate more effectively because you'll absorb the fluid faster and you will retain it better. And the number that you're trying to hit is about 150% of what you've lost.
Okay, and how kind of quickly can dehydration creep in? Like if you're doing loads of rides over a number of days, can it kind of build up and then hit you, or is it something that's like you go out for a ride, it's hot afternoon, and then suddenly wham?
It can happen relatively quickly. You can dehydrate yourself in a single ride if you're not careful to a significant degree, especially if you don't start it well hydrated. If you start a little bit on the back foot and then drink inadequately during the ride, you can be really quite dehydrated by the end. But I think what will probably catch most people out more frequently is stepwise dehydration that occurs over 2 or 3 days, and that would typically occur when you either go somewhere hot or when the weather changes. You know, like we go into summer, you've been used to riding with however many bottles you are, you then start a training week that's a lot warmer, you get a bit dehydrated on the first day, the next day you start a bit on the back foot and you get a bit deeper in the hole, and then probably by day 3 or 4 you're actually running on empty. And I think that's when, say, monitoring your daily morning body weight is a really useful metric to look at.
Like, to finish with, how do you improve your hydration? How do you kind of learn from any mistakes and like know what to do in certain situations, what to put in your bottles, what you should be drinking?
I think I'd liken sorting your hydration out as a rider to learning racecraft or learning pacing or learning any of the other kind of subtle skills that make you a good bike rider ultimately. And that would be through organised trial and error, you know, and experience. We've talked about some of the theory of like what you should be drinking, how much you should be drinking, how you can measure those things. But I think if you engage with all those questions yourself, if you are quite diligent about recording how much you drink, what you drank on bike rides of different lengths in different temperatures, you put that sort of stuff in your training diary and you get thinking about it and you make some sensible adjustments over time, you'll start to be able to correlate in your head, well, when I do this is the outcome, like this makes things better, or this thing makes things worse, or this has no effect. And it does take a while, but when you're trying to answer a complex question like that, you've kind of got to evolve your way to the answer. So if you can engage with thinking about how you're hydrating, using some intelligent science, but then ultimately just like trial and error, then a year down the line, all of a sudden you're going to really be better at doing it.
Hydration then is a big part of our riding, and a big thanks to Andy for showing us the difference between whether we get it right and wrong and how much of an effect that can have on our cycling. And of course, if you were wondering of how to carry all these liquids and water when you're riding, there are a whole heap of options out there depending on what your riding preferences are. Well, you don't need to use them all at once, as I am, but maybe you do. If you're crossing the Gobi Desert or the Sahara, it's always a need to carry 10 litres of water on you. Let us know in the comment section down below though if you've got any questions, and we'll do our best to get back to you. Big thanks for watching this video, and we'll see you on the next one.